Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. So good to have you here. We just wrapped up day 12 of the Alex Murdaugh trial. He's on trial for the double murders of his wife, Maggie, and son, Paul. We had some financial stuff today and then some other stuff that wasn't very financial. So we're going to jump in soon. Real quick, I have to say a big hello to this angel alibier who I got to meet today. Thank you for your donation, by the way. Very kind of you. And I also have some other people to thank for donations. All right. Katie, a dog named Boo, someone, and Kay and Larry Woodcock. Love you guys. Kathy Watson, Arizona, someone who lives in Greenville, and someone. So some people don't put their names, they just put someone. So thank you very much for your donations. It helps me to be able to do what I love every day. All right, so music fact of the day. One-hit wonders. You know, all it takes is one good song to make you super, super rich, right? So let's see the top 4 one-hit wonders as far as how much money that song made. Number 4, Vanilla Ice. Ice Ice Baby made $12 million. He totally ripped off Queen. Under pressure, by the way. Sir Mix-a-Lot, Baby Got Back, $20 million, y'all. Psy, Gangnam Style, $60 million. And number 1, Morton Harkett from Aha, Take On Me, $60 million. Love that song. By the way, I'm going to post an acoustic version that he did that is just amazing. Just as good as the original. But anyways, all right. So packed house again today. Morning session. People are lining up earlier and earlier every day. Also, there was a law enforcement class there today from, I think, Dorchester Academy is what I heard. They were so well behaved. Unfortunately, they came on a day where it's a little bit boring with financial stuff, but they got the experience of the judicial system. And I think it's really cool. They were just great, super quiet, very respectful of the process. So I'm not sure anybody will hear this that knows any student there, but I was super impressed. In the very beginning, before the jury's brought in, there's some back and forth about striking the testimony of Miss Shelley, who is Miss Libby Murdaugh's caregiver. Not sure if she currently is. Ultimately, Judge Newman denies that motion. So Groundhog Day, we know yesterday Judge Newman ruled that the financial crimes could come in because that fits into the prosecution's motive. And so we had Gene Seckinger, who has testified just last week for the judge and outside the presence of the jury. So I'm not going to go through everything that she testified to today because I've got it on an episode from last week. There were a few little things, but we'll kind of give you a broad picture of what she testified to. She's known Alex since high school when she was 16. We know the attorney fees that are brought in belong to the firm, and they sit in a holding account until the end of the year. And after everything's paid, each employee is given a percentage of that little community pot of money based on the percentage that they brought in. So we know also she testified last week that Alec could bring in as much as 7 figures at the end of the year. Now they get a base salary of $125,000, but really that end of the year bonus is the meat of their money that they make. So she also talked about after a case is settled, it goes into a client trust. So they take out attorney fees, loans, liens, any kind of medical bills, outstanding payments, and then what's left goes to the client. So in May of 2021, we know she noted that there was a disbursement that went to Forge and not the firm. So we know she said that would be stealing if the money didn't come to the firm. And the real Forge Consulting is based out of Atlanta, and they set up structured annuities as well as payment plans for people who are disabled. And we know that Alec opened the Bank of America account under Richard Alexander Murdaugh, DBA, doing business as Forge, to make it look like he was depositing into the Forge. The firm's legal fees range from 30 to 40% based on what's done in the case. And so May 17th, in the Hirschberger case that the firm was working on, the fees were listed as structured fees and dispersed. So the attorney fees were paid to that fake Forge account. And she confronted him that the money should have went from the insurance company to the real Forge. And she saw this $83,333 check to the fake Forge. Now, Alec explained, look, we got this coming up with the boat crash. I'm trying to put some money in Maggie's name. And so to her, she realized he's hiding money, but she holds off and really was just trying to figure out how to handle this on the books. But she had until December to sort of figure out how she's going to do that. So later that month, she has a private conversation with Alex paralegal, and Alex paralegal had concerns with this Mack truck settlement. And they'd only had a check for expenses. And Chris Wilson's firm was handling the money in that case. They should have mailed them their fees as well. But so far, the only thing they've gotten is expenses. So she contacted Chris Wilson's paralegal, who said, Alex been paid. And then an email from the paralegal about it said, your boss and mine got their fees. So, but Alex paralegal, she was really worried about kind of Alec retaliating against her. So on May 27th, there was an email sent to Chris Wilson's office about clarifying what documents they needed to get or send. And Chris Wilson's paralegal replied and said she would forward that email to Chris. It was a few days later because the paralegal, I believe, was on vacation. But the next day, Alex says, the money is in Chris's trust, and why do you need all this information? He said he would get all the information. So we know she testified the day of the murders. She goes up to confront him about the missing money from the firm. He's leaning against a filing cabinet, gives her a dirty look that he's never given her, asks what she wants. And she said she needed proof that money was in Chris Wilson's account. So, but we know that she gets the phone call, or Alec gets the phone call that his dad is terminal. And so she stopped and just respected the fact that he's going through some emotions, most likely, and expected him to go to the hospital, but he didn't. He called her around 4 p.m. that day, asking for the balance on his 401k for the motion to compel hearing, which was set for June 10th, 3 days after the murders. Now, if you remember, Mr. Tinsley testified that there wouldn't have been an explosion on that June 10th motion to compel hearing, but the fuse would have been lit. So we can see he's already preparing for having to show some money that he has. But the murders stopped all of this for a while because they just wanted to support him. And she said they were scared. They were actually terrified. They didn't know who would have done this. You know, is somebody going to come into the office or what? Somebody going to go after Alec? You know, obviously everybody's scared. But Lee Cope, one of the partners, contacted Chris asking for information about all this. And then on July 19th, Chris emailed Alec, which he forwarded to Jean, saying, I have the money. The money's here. So from July to September, Alec is not in the office very much. And so Alex paralegal tells Joan there is a personal check for $225,000 from Chris Wilson to Alec from the Ferris case, which is the Mack truck case, by the way. So Jean starts going through things and printing out checks and realizes he's stealing. I mean, he's just robbing them blind almost. So Mark Ball comes in the loop and says that money wouldn't have gone to Forge because it was a workers' comp case. So apparently workers' comp settlements don't go to Forge. I'm not up on this, so if I'm wrong, let me know. But Lee Cope talks to someone from the real Forge Consulting after seeing the check for Forge, the fake Forge, with Alex's signature on the back of that check. And then she found bank statements that had Richard Alexander Murdaugh doing business as Forge. So they presented a spreadsheet of what went into Forge and how much was stolen from each client. And the firm ultimately hired a forensic accountant. Former FBI people came in. They looked back 10 years to see how long and how much he stole and how long he had been doing it. So they go through each time Alex stole money, how much, what he used it for. There were like private planes, paying off loans. Now, at this point, when they're going through the numbers, like one by one by one by one, the jury's totally engaged. Before this, they didn't seem super interested to me. And I said that on the little morning update that I did when we had break. Before break, they weren't super engaged. Once they started breaking down all these huge figures, and I'm not going to get into it because it went on for a long time. Let's just say he stole a boatload of money from a bunch of people who were very vulnerable. And that's, you guys kind of know that whole story, right? And then, so the whole time that Creighton Waters is asking, what's the amount? Did you reimburse the client? Yes. Why? She would say, because Alex stole it or stole that. I mean, every time it was just pounded into the jury's head that he stole. So they go into Russell Lafitte being conservator on accounts and how he funneled money to Alec. We know Russell Lafitte was found guilty in federal court at the end of last year, and I think he's awaiting sentencing. So the law firm is still paying clients back from him stealing, still to this day. It's insane. So over $300,000 was put into Palmetto State Bank for Alex's personal use in this case. Just insanity. He used company credit cards also for personal use, but they would deduct that from the end of the year bonus that he got. In each case, he got substantial legal fees, and she's known him since she's 16. And then Creighton says, do you really know him? Well, there's an objection, but she gets in. I don't think anyone ever knew him. And then she said something he did was BS. I was actually not in the courtroom at that time. Before they start cross-examining, Jim Griffin asked the judge to read those instructions to the jury, and he just instructs the jury that the financial crimes are not proof of the murders, but can be used in a limited capacity to prove motive. But you can't use it to kind of like judge his character, although I'm judging. All right, so on cross, the summary of clients who were stolen from, they had to pay back. The firm was working with law enforcement since September 21st. They've been sharing information with them. And the firm paid out over $2.8 million to reimburse so far. They were a victim of misconduct. Each repayment for each repayment they've made, Jim Griffin made clear Alec has pending criminal charges for everyone. And also, Russell Lafitte was found guilty. So he says, we're not here to try these financial crimes. We're here for murder. Misconduct has been going on since 2011-ish, which is 10 years before the murder. So he's sort of pointing out, like, the stealing is nothing new. But he fooled a lot of people. Jean said he fooled a lot of people. And she said, it hurts me. I take it very personally. It's a betrayal of trust. And I get that. You've worked for them since 99, and you find out that he is absolutely, just taking advantage of every single person that is employed at that firm. And so I thought it was good the way Jim Griffin cross-examined her, because he said, I'm not trying to diminish your feelings. When I ask questions, I'm trying to figure this into the murders. And, that they name partners who have forked up their own money to reimburse clients, even including his brother, Randy Murdaugh, who is a lawyer there. So the day of the murder, he says, you went to his office to find out about the Ferris case. And Alex says, what do you want now? And she said, yeah, he gave me a disgusted look. But Griffin points out that once they were in Alex's office, his demeanor changed, and he assured Jean that Chris Wilson had the money. So you fast forward to September, and then his paralegal found the check from Chris Wilson's office to Alec, not to Forge Consulting. And he said, all you've talked about involves Fake Forge and Palmetto State Bank going back to 2010. He said, June 7th, when you talked to Alec about the fees, you talked to Lee Cope beforehand, and the concern Alec was hiding money for this boat crash lawsuit. And she said, yeah, moving money into Maggie's name. And he says, you thought it was odd how he structured fees in the Hirschberger case. And she says, yes. So then Mr. Griffin says in May of 2021, the disbursement fees went to Forge. The lawyers have structured attorney fees, and have they ever done that? And she said once. And so Griffin says it goes from insurance company to the financial institution, and then it's paid out in an annuity to a lawyer, so it delays taxes. And that's in her previous testimony, and y'all can go back and find that. But ultimately, Gene said he didn't have permission to do that, and he never consulted with other attorneys in trying to do his own structuring of the fees, I guess. This is why I do not like financials, y'all. But Griffin said you never talked to him about the Hirschberger fees, and she said not after the murders. And Griffin says the settlement in the Mack truck case, where's the fee and where's the I'm sorry, y'all. What I did was this. Let me just explain why I'm a little choppy tonight. When I get here to this hotel and then I have to type up 20 pages of notes, it takes me so long, and I just scanned them in. So she says after the call about Randolph, his dad being terminal, she just turned into friend mode because she was going to ask Alec for proof he didn't get the money. But she explains after that call about Randolph's health, she just didn't address it. Interestingly enough, she says she hasn't really spent time with Alex and his family in over 17 years. And she said she didn't address the issue about the money again. She said, I assumed he was going to the hospital. And when asked, when you learned about the murders, you were scared. And she said there were just lots of rumors. Nothing this violent had happened before. Would they come from for Alex? Would they come to the firm? And so, yeah, I mean, I get that, because at this point, kind of the word on the street, or what everybody theorized, is this was a vigilante killing or a revenge killing for the boat case. And so, but Griffin asks her, when you learned about the murders, your mind didn't go to, oh, he killed them because I asked about the Ferris case. And she said no. So he's just trying to push to the jury a little bit that, yeah, he's a thief, but he didn't kill his wife and son because of this. And he asks, you know, the inquiry didn't stop because of the murders. And she said a couple of weeks, maybe a month. And so Jim Griffin points out it got him an extra month. In other words, like, is it really worth it now to be in the middle of a double murder investigation when you got a month of this not being any issue for you at all? He asked, did you talk to Maggie? And she said she never really had conversations with Maggie. So he says in September of 2021, you're doing the books. You had commitments and personal issues, but Maggie and Paul's murder didn't delay you. And she said, in a way, yes, it did. But Griffin said you decided to see if any structured fees were done in 2021 like he did in Hirschberger. And she said, yeah, because she was still suspicious. So anyways, it's just a lot of kind of what we already know about that. But one thing that Jim Griffin points out is there was $1 to $2 million in fees collected by Alec, not including the Ferris case or whatever. And Gene said the clients weren't complaining. There really wasn't a reason to look. In other words, the firm's not getting calls from clients saying, hey, I'm not getting, you know, money. They were getting money, just not all of it. They weren't getting what Alec was getting. He was giving money to himself too. We know that as a busy parent, you don't have time to completely overhaul your life in the new year. One change that's easy to make that will make your life easier in 2023 is Little Spoon. Most of the baby and kid foods at the grocery store is heavily processed and often on the shelf longer than your little one has been in this world. Not cool, and not the quality nutrition our kids deserve. Little Spoon makes everything fresh, organic, and uses absolutely nothing artificial. It's just like homemade, all delivered to your door and ready in seconds. From baby food to big kid, Little Spoon has you covered for years. Little Spoon even hides vegetables and chicken nuggets, mac and cheese, and more. Their smoothies come in pouches that make on-the-go snack easy, healthy, and tasty. And yes, I tried one. They're great. Did I mention it comes right to your door? It's flexible, easy, and everything stores in the refrigerator or freezer. You can pick your menu for a variety of foods to introduce to your child. The price is right, the quality is unmatched, so make this year's chaos a little more manageable with time-saving, delicious, and healthy meals and snacks your kids will love. Go to littlespoon.com and enter my code WhatTheWorld at checkout to get 50% off your first Little Spoon order. That's littlespoon.com and enter WhatTheWorld for 50% off at checkout. I love Thrive Market. I've been able to find brands not widely seen in stores that are much cheaper than other places online. I've been using their Foy CBD Relief Cream for my knee with amazing results. And this is just one example of the many products you can find to better your life, from foods to beauty to health. As a Thrive Market member, I can save money on every single order. And on average, I save 30%. On my last order, I saved $93. On top of the massive savings on each order, Thrive Market has a deals page that changes every day. It gives me cash back on many brands, and they have a price match guarantee. You can search dietary restriction using filters, and even better, they help a family in need with their 1-for-1 membership matching program. You join, they give. Join Thrive Market today and get 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. Go to thrivemarket.com/whattheworld for 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. That's Thrive, THRIVE, market.com/whattheworld, thrivemarket.com/what. So she didn't see any reason to pressure Alec about the money because before then they just weren't getting any complaints. So on September 3rd of 21, they were running reports and they see Forge on Alec's account, and the paralegal sees the $250,000 check from Chris Wilson. And when he called for the balance on the 401k about the boat case, he had called before about that. Jim Griffin's just trying to reiterate that him calling for the 401k balance is nothing new. And so ultimately, that's kind of like, what we didn't know about the testimony. Some of that we did. But I'm going to tell you, man, the next one, Ronnie Crosby. This poor man, he's mad, he's hurt, he's sad, he's devastated. He didn't hide it. I think that everybody on that jury felt for him. He cried on the stand, got very emotional, definitely was close with Paul, but he was a partner of the firm and an ex-partner of Alec. As we know, he was kicked out of the firm. So he's been there since 94, about 30 years. Alec's grandpa actually was at the firm when he started, but not super involved. And he confirms that all the fees belong to the law firm. And he said Alec had up and down years as far as bringing in money, but overall he had really good clientele. And he also explains how lawyers will share cases with other law firms. And he said personally, about 70% of the time, he shares cases with other law firms. And they have agreements before the case of how fees will be dispersed. They ask about Alec's cell phone usage, always on the cell phone. And how is he as a lawyer? So he said he was good with people. He was good at reading people, understanding people, making people believe he cared. He was good at strategizing how to get the insurance companies to pay more. But technically, he said, I'm not going to insult his intelligence because he's intelligent, but he just essentially said he wasn't technically a good lawyer from like a technical side. So then the recession hits, right? You remember that's like 2008-ish. Crosby said that Alec and Barrett Boulware bought land speculating that they could sell it for development. Well, the recession hit and Alec had to carry these loans because the other people in the group just couldn't do it. So there were cases that Crosby saw that could rectify the situation with this loan for this property development that didn't work out, which was the Pickney case, the Badger case. He named several of these huge settlement cases that was expected that he thought, Alec would be fine. And then one thing he said, and I'm pretty sure that this is what he said, Mallory Beach worked for his wife, and he got very quiet. So there's a conversation about structuring his fees. He did that. And so in spring of 2021, he had a conversation with Alec about structuring his fees. And he told Alec, with the interest rates being so bad, it's not smart. But Crosby set up a real structure. Alec didn't. And he asked if he knew Gloria Satterfield. And he actually knew her for several years. When he and his wife had their first kids, like, she would come over and help with laundry and things like that. He talked to Alec briefly about what happened with her. Alec just said that the dogs knocked her down, and his kid and Gloria's kids were going to sue him for her death. And he thought it was kind of being presented to him as like a friendly insurance claim to help the boys out. So in the Ferris case with the Mack truck accident, Crosby was involved just kind of early on in that. What happened was the drive shaft fell out of a Mack truck and caused an accident. Oh, Lord have mercy, y'all. Not enough coffee in the world for these days. So there was an accident, but there was also a recall on that drive shaft. Lord have mercy in heaven. Let me just take a moment. There we go. He didn't do much with that case until it was time for trial, just kind of advising him on some things. So in that case, there were 3 firms, by the way, involved in that. And then in May of 2021, he had a conversation with Jean about the fees. And Jean thought Chris and Alec were giving her the runaround. And Jean felt that Alec was hiding money, and she expressed that to him. So Crosby says, do you want to really know what I said? And prosecutor's like, yeah. He's like, oh, F no, we're not doing that. It's illegal, unethical, and it puts the firm at risk with issues with the South Carolina bar, and things like that could come up. So there's no reason for Crosby to doubt that the money was in Chris's possession, though. So you see, he had that trust of everybody, but he took that trust and he ran with it. And behind their back, he was lying for years, almost a whole decade. But so they talk about his relationship with Alec's family. He knew everybody, and asked if he knew Maggie. Yes. When they asked if he knew Paul, he gets very emotional, quiet. He said, I've known him since he was born. He and Buster called him Uncle Ronnie, and they lived very close. So Paul would hunt on his property. I mean, he was so emotional, and it was so genuine, and that hurt and devastation is still very apparent. And he just didn't hide it, nor should he. So he said Paul was great with kids and spent a lot of time with his son, with Crosby's son. Paul would take him hunting, and his kid just adored Paul. And as Mr. Crosby's son got older, he'd go to Moselle to go hunting. So June 7th, he doesn't remember if he saw Alec in the office that day, but he knows he saw him at 11 p.m. He had been working a trial and was going to go home and take his son fishing. So he was at home getting the boat ready to go fish with his son. And they'd actually invited Paul to go that next day with them, but Paul had to work. And his wife got a call from a partner's wife, and they wanted the number of a friend of theirs who's a registered nurse. That was a little confusing for me, but ultimately Mr. Crosby calls Randy Murdaugh, who said Paul and Maggie both had been shot. And he told his wife he had to go, and he went to Moselle, got there about 11 o'clock, and he could see the lights at the kennel. And so he explained he kind of went around like the storage thing and got out of the car. Mark Ball and Alec were there, and he spoke to them. He said Maggie and Paul's bodies were still there, and he stayed at Moselle until about 3:30 a.m. or so. He didn't know what to do or say, and who would in that situation? He said he told everybody they needed to get sleep because it's going to be a very difficult few days. And he was the first to leave, but he thought everybody else kind of followed suit shortly after. He went back to Moselle and had some conversations with Alec. And in the days after, Alec told him the events over multiple conversations of the night of the 7th of the murders. He said, just as lawyers, they wanted to try to help, and as friends, they wanted to help figure out who would have done this. Alec told him, and he said maybe multiple people, that he worked from 5:30 to 6, left work, went to Moselle. Paul came home from work. They ride around. They have dinner at the house. Maggie's there. Maggie and Paul went to the kennels. He said he sat on the couch, fell asleep at 8 o'clock, woke up around 9, then went to check on his mom. So it's kind of the same story that we've heard, that they've put out as his alibi. He also told Mr. Crosby he laid on the bed with his mom and said he came back to Moselle and went to the main residence, got there. Paul and Maggie aren't there, and got back in the Suburban, drove down to the kennels and found their bodies. So that's the story that Crosby got. He said Alex specifically said he did not go to the kennels that night. So what do? Prosecution plays Paul's kennel video. And the look on Mr. Crosby's face, it just hurt, just absolute hurt, because I think at that point you see he's pretty suspicious. Maybe Alec did do this, and this is on the stand, but he asks if he recognizes voices. He says, that's Paul, Maggie, and Alec. How sure are you? 100% sure. And he just shakes his head from side to side. Like, no. The law firm was really close-knit. He said it was a family environment. They often hung out on the weekends together, and the families grew up together. And the murders, it was beyond horror and disbelief. He said the staff had fear, security measures were taken, and the loss of Paul and Maggie, as much of a shock as you could imagine. And he said the law firm rallied around Alec, and then, as we know, Randolph dies 3 days later. He said we all needed to be together to support each other. So he said there's no way no way is he going to talk about money at a time like this. And he trusted Alec when he said the money was in a trust in the Ferris case, the Mack truck case. July 2021, the firm heard via email from Chris Wilson's firm that they had the money. So he said that reassured him that nothing was to be worried about. And then they jump and Alec asks Mr. Crosby to say the eulogy at Paul's funeral, and he did. And he said he was around Paul a lot. And he said Paul had free reign on my property, but he was polite and always let me know when he was going to be there. They talk about Paul having a 12 gauge Super Black Eagle shotgun. He said for a time, Paul was obsessed with hunting hog with dogs, or the 300 Blackout also. And Crosby said that he would invite Paul to come to his property to hunt the hogs, because he said if you have seen what hogs can do to property, then you would know why. I have no clue. I need to Google it, y'all. I'm not up on my hog. I know what hogwash is, but I'm not sure what hogs do to property. And then he said he saw casings the night of the murder, and he thought they were 223s, but found out the next day about the 300 Blackout. And asked Alec about the 300 Blackout of Paul and Buster's. He knew they had gotten those. And he said, Mr. Crosby acknowledged Paul would leave his guns at my place. We've learned Paul definitely left stuff everywhere. And was forgetful, I guess. But he said that Alec told him there was one stolen and there was one in the house. So he assumed they still had one because of the replacement. So in September of 2021, Crosby was preparing for trial in Dorchester, and that was set to last several weeks. But they were doing the pretrial motions on that. And September 2nd, he missed calls from Mark Ball. He said, we have a problem. You need to come now. Crosby says, I need to go home and eat. I don't need to come now. And Mark Ball said, now. So they met at Danny Henderson's and also find that Mark Ball was there. So they gave him a folder, and it showed the front and the back of the checks, and asked Mr. Crosby to check these out. And Danny said, you're going to need a drink. And so Creighton Waters, the prosecutor, asked, "Did you?" He said, "More than one." So he said, "We have to kick him out." Mr. Crosby says, "We have to kick him out. He can't practice with us. It was clear the money had been stolen." So he said there was another meeting, which, and I'm not sure I got all the names, but it was Danny Henderson, Randy Murdaugh met with him and met with Alec. And Alec said he knew he'd get caught at some point and admitted to stealing the money. So ultimately, the firm hired expensive investigators. They turned over what they had to SLED. Then they hired an outside forensic auditor and did their own internal investigation into how long he had been doing this and how much he had stolen. If he knew he had been asked to resign or he said if he would have known, he would have asked Alec to resign or would have forced a vote to kick him out. He said he would have turned it over to law enforcement and the bar. So on cross, you were informed of the meeting where Alec was confronted, and you said he knew he'd get caught. And Crosby said, that's what I recall. And then Griffin says he asked you to do the eulogy for Paul. And he said, yes, he asked. And I did. And then Griffin asked, Paul carried a 300 blackout and 12 gauge Super Eagle. And Crosby said that's his recollection. So he brings out the actual camouflage shotgun. He says he can't be sure, but it looks an awful lot like Paul's shotgun. So defense attorney Griffin asked, at Moselle on the 7th, the night of the murders, you went in the main entrance? And he said, yep, they were open. So defense says, you said you could see shell casings you thought were 223s. Where? He said, I saw one in the driveway closer to the road from Paul and Maggie's bodies. And the defense says, were you able to get past the crime scene tape? And he says he's not sure the tape was up at that point. He's asked, were the bodies covered? And he said, yes. So defense says you were able to get into the crime scene and see shell casings. And he said he walked around to talk to the fire department to kind of see what was going on. And he could see 223 casings. So the defense says you assisted with trying to figure out who could have done this. And he said in the days following, they had lots of conversations with their law partners about who could have done this. And he said, it's just talk of what you normally would do in a situation like this. And then, so he talks about you went to Jimmy Baller. So apparently they sell cars, portable buildings, auto mechanic. And on the Friday before the murders, Paul had taken his white F-150 in, and Mr. Crosby was going to see if Paul's guns were in his truck and see and so he looked inside, and then there was a pistol in there and some shotgun shells. So what had happened was CB Rowe, who I just refer to him now as a sunflower killer because we haven't heard much except that he killed sunflowers. He picked Paul up when Paul dropped his truck off. So Mr. Crosby asked them to pull surveillance to see if Paul had gotten his guns out of that truck, but he wasn't seen getting any of the guns out of the truck. And then the defense says you went on the 8th to Moselle and asks, was there still blood and biological material on the scene? And Mr. Crosby says yes. And the defense says, did you see birdshot pellets not collected by SLED? And Mr. Crosby has a long pause here. And you can tell it was just, he was going back there in his mind. And I've not seen anything this graphic ever in my life. And I can't imagine that you ever get it out of your mind. But he said, yes, it appeared to be TSS type lead, whatever that means, y'all. And then, so the defense asked, did anybody gather those up? And he said, Jim. And then he said, Mr. Griffin. And he apologized. And he said, you know, we're friends. And he said, you can call me Jim. It was a nice little exchange. He said that area in that room, it was so bad. We thought we'd clean it up. We were getting biological material all over. And he just kind of stopped and said, we didn't even try to clean up. And defense attorney Griffin said, it's still etched in your memory. And he said, yes. So at this point, Alec is sitting over there rocking, doing his back and forth rocking. So he asks Mr. Crosby at 11 o'clock when he got to Moselle, did it look like the crime scene was being preserved? And Mr. Crosby said he saw people walking through that crime scene. He assumed they were doing whatever they needed to do. But the defense says, did you, Mark, someone else go to the main residence? And he said he didn't remember who told them to go, but they were getting ready to take crime scene photographs of the scene and asked them to go to the house. So at the house, it was Mr. Crosby, Danny, Mark Ball, Randy Murdaugh, John Marvin. Alec at some point comes in with some deputies and Chris Wilson. He said maybe a couple of more. And when asked, did it look like law enforcement had searched the house? He said, I don't know what it would look like, but he was under the impression it had not. So Alec came in with officers and they took the clothing he had on. He went into a room, put on some new clothes. A bag was held open and Alec dropped them in. And then they start talking about his phone usage. He would take calls in the middle of depositions, in the middle of personal conversations, in the middle of partner meetings. He would just walk out of the room and take phone calls. Now, it's kind of interesting because we know he had this side business with Cousin Eddie. So I'm sure he had a lot of people on the horn. But after the murders, he said that it was sporadic when Alec would come in, but he was having trouble sleeping after the murders and losing his wife and son and his dad. He said he knew he was taking sleeping medication and stuff for anxiety. So he said sometimes he would walk into Alec's office and he would be falling asleep in his chair. He had lost weight and wasn't eating much. So when asked about Alec's demeanor on June 7th or the 8th, he said he was upset. We cried together. And sometimes he told me how much Paul loved me, and we would get emotional every time. And so defense attorney Griffin asked, did he spend a lot of time with Buster at Maggie's parents after the murders? And Mr. Crosby said he'd say in a text that he was there at Maggie's parents' house. So on July 4th, Alec and Buster, or he wasn't sure if it was the 4th, but it was kind of something around that holiday. He invited Buster and Alec to come to his house, and Randy and his wife were there too. He said that Alec and Buster came by boat, and Alec had a gun on the boat. And he asks Mr. Crosby, had you ever seen Alec carry a gun before the murders? And Mr. Crosby says no. So defense says Alec and Buster put out a reward for information about the murders. And he said, I know a reward was put out. So on redirect, how long have you known Alex Murdaugh? 25 years. Did you really know Alex Murdaugh? That was an objection that was sustained. Now, Alec did nod at Mr. Crosby as he walked past him and was done with his testimony. So gunshot residue. We got the gunshot residue lady. She was so excited about her job. I have to say, people that just, you can tell they thoroughly are fascinated by what they do every day. She's one of those ladies. This is Megan Fletcher. She is a forensic scientist with SLED. She was admitted as an expert witness for the 50th time today. And there was a nice little exchange with the defense and her when they didn't object. So it was really nice. So she likes to focus on trace evidence, which is not visible to the naked eye. So she got her gunshot residue training for 11 months in-house with SLED. So apparently they do all that. That would be fun to do. Gunshot residue is everything that comes out of the muzzle. Gunshot primer residue, it comes from the primer component of a cartridge. And they use a fancy microscope to magnify 30 to 50,000 times. It shows shape and morphology of little teeny tiny things we can't see with our eyeballs. Then they use energy dispersing X-ray detector. It shows elements in the sample. And so beyond 6 hours, they will not analyze anything from living individuals because it's mostly gone. And you can't trace it to a certain event after that amount of time. As soon as you put the gun down after you shot somebody, you're transferring gunshot residue off your hands onto whatever you touch. You can rinse it off washing your hands. If you put your hands in your pocket, you're constantly removing that gunshot residue. So if you wash your hands, most of it would be gone, but you could still find some. Now, get this, gunshot residue can get on you from 2 to 3 feet on the sides, but straight ahead, 60 feet in front because it follows the bullet. That's crazy. So, looking at the vicinity from a firearm, did they shoot or transfer? So she said you could get it from holding, like, in other words, if you're in the vicinity, you can get it on you. You can get it on you if you shoot. You can also get it on you if it's transferred onto you. You can get it from holding a dirty or recently fired gun. So they test the left and right sides of the chest and sleeves of the t-shirt he wore that night, and the left and right side of the crotch area of the shorts. And then the hands, we know, were tested just after 11 p.m. the night of the murders. So on the clothing, you can't tell when it got there. So it has to be removed. They cannot pinpoint when it was put on there. You have to brush it off, wash it off, and it can stay on clothing indefinitely. So SLED doesn't test on victims of gunshot wounds anymore since the beginning of 2022 because it doesn't add any value to the investigation. So they wear lab coats when they're testing gunshot residue. So let's get to the goods. On June the 8th of 2021, this is the day after the murders, Jamie Hall, I believe she testified last week, called her in because she smelled the shirt and it had a strong odor of laundry detergent, not the musky smell that they're used to. So the shirt, they ultimately find, let's see here. They look through like an X-ray detector to scan for lead to see if it's present. So they looked at the shirt, the shorts, the shoes, and the gunshot residue from the kit that was used on the Moselle property. So the prosecution points out, you got this shirt tested on the 8th, the same day you were asked to come smell the shirt. And she says yes. So the seatbelt was examined on September 1st of 2021. There was one particle on the buckle on the red button where you would push your finger, to let your seatbelt loose. And let's see what else we got here, y'all. The rain jacket, they tested that on October 5th, 2021. They bring out a picture of the rain jacket. It's so large, they had to use 2 tables to test it, by the way. And if it's laying on butcher paper, that's because they're trying to collect any kind of trace evidence that might fall off of that. It took 2 people to test it. So she gave Jamie Hall instructions where to collect. Remember, Jamie Hall said she was being told exactly where to swap for this when she testified last week. And then the witness who's testifying now was documenting. And they bring out the raincoat for her to look at. They're told something, could have transferred gunshot residue on it. But so here's the deal. Okay. This thing was full of gunshot residue. So they had 25 particles on the outside and they had 38 gunshot residue particles on the inside. That is a significant number. She said it's significantly more was on there, but she made a decision to stop because she collected what she needed. And she said to check every single particle would have taken a week. Her expert opinion, consistent with wearing it inside out in the vicinity of a shooting, or if he wrapped up recently fired guns in that, it would leave that amount. And again, she says this is a significant amount of particles. By the way, those are the shoes she tested and the seat belt. Put a link in the description for all y'all just listening. So the prosecution says 6 feet, asks if it's full length. Like, he lifts this thing up and says he's 6 foot tall and asks, is this raincoat whatever? It didn't look like a raincoat. It looked like some kind of a tarp poncho. I see why Miss Shelley thought it was a tarp. It looks like a blue tarp that's got places for your arms. So he puts it against himself and it went to his knees. So there was one particle on the exterior of the hood, 3 particles on the inside of the hood. And ultimately, he just said, recently fired firearm wrapped in this could be the suspect. And she says yes. The judge ended it for the day. So tomorrow, first thing, she'll be on cross-exam. And should be an interesting day tomorrow for a lot of reasons. But anyways, we'll talk about it tomorrow night. In the meantime, you can catch me on Law and Crime for the morning update. Go to the YouTube channel, or if you have the TV channel, you can watch it there. And so people have been asking, how do I watch these Q&As? It's on Law and Crime's YouTube channel. You just pull up the live stream of the trial, and it's smack right there where lunch is. You may have to fast forward if you're not watching it live. But anyway, so yeah, man, I'm done before 9. I'm going to upload this and go to bed because we got to do it all again for day 13 tomorrow. All right, guys, we will see you soon. Have a good one.